The ballroom was glowing with soft golden light, the kind that made every glass sparkle and every laugh echo just a little too loud. It was one of those charity nights where the wealthy showed up in designer suits and glittering gowns, smiling wide for the cameras while whispering deals behind champagne flutes. Rachel had been to more of these than she could count, and each one felt heavier than the last. She stood near the centre of the room, her shoulders tense, listening to another man with a slick grin talk about investments, as if children's health was just another line on a balance sheet. Her polite smile was starting to ache. She glanced around, desperate for an excuse to step away. That was when she saw him. By the service entrance, half in the shadows, stood a man who clearly didn't belong to this glittering crowd. His rented black suit didn't quite fit across the shoulders, and his tie was knotted in a way that suggested more effort than practice. He looked like someone who had spent most of his life working with his hands, not shaking them at cocktail parties. He wasn't mingling, he wasn't laughing, he was just standing there quietly, like he was counting the minutes until he could leave. Their eyes met for a brief second. His expression wasn't hungry like the others. He wasn't trying to sell her something or charm her into a deal. He just looked tired but steady. And in that moment, Rachel made a decision she couldn't fully explain. She excused herself from the circle of men crowding her, walked straight toward the stranger, and before he could even react, she leaned in close enough for only him to hear. "Please," she whispered, "pretend you're my date tonight." His eyes widened in shock. "Mom, But before he could finish, Rachel slipped her arm through his and turned him back toward the crowd. Her voice was clear, firm, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Everyone," she announced with a smile that hid her nerves, "I'd like you to meet Michael." The room froze, then the laughter started. Not polite laughter, but the kind that stung. Someone near the bar muttered, "Her date? That mechanic-looking guy?" Another voice, louder now, said, "She must be joking." The sound spread across the room like wildfire, cruel and cutting. Michael's face flushed red. His instinct was to pull away, to disappear before the laughter swallowed him whole. He whispered urgently, "This is a mistake. I should go." But Rachel held on tighter. She wasn't sure why she'd done this, or what would come of it, but she knew one thing. She was tired of people thinking they could laugh at whoever didn't fit their world. She straightened her shoulders and whispered back to him, steady and calm, "Not tonight, just trust me." And for the first time in a long time, Michael didn't step away. The laughter didn't fade right away. It rolled across the tables in waves, people nudging each other with smug little grins, like they were all in on the same cruel joke. Michael kept his eyes down, wishing the floor would just open and let him sink through. He wasn't used to rooms like this. He was used to oil stains on concrete floors, the smell of rubber and gasoline, the radio humming in the background of his shop. This was another world entirely. And right now, it felt like the whole world was pointing at him. Rachel could feel his arm tense under her hand. He was seconds away from pulling back, leaving her standing there alone. But she held firm, her voice steady as she guided him toward a table near the front. She didn't know what she was doing exactly, only that letting him walk away would mean letting the room win. They sat down, and the stares followed. A man with perfectly combed silver hair leaned forward, smirking as if he couldn't wait to play with his new toy. "So, Michael," he said loudly, making sure the people at nearby tables could hear, "what is it that you do?" Michael swallowed hard. His mind raced for a second, wondering if he should lie, if he should make something up to sound impressive. But that wasn't him. So he cleared his throat and said simply, "I fix cars. Been running my own garage for about 10 years now." The silver-haired man chuckled, almost delighted. "A mechanic? How charming." A ripple of laughter broke out again. Michael's ears burned, but before the humiliation could settle in, a woman at the far end of the table spoke up. Her hair was grey, her dress plain compared to the glittering gowns around her. She leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice warm. "You're Michael Thompson, aren't you? You fixed my Buick last winter when the dealership tried to charge me triple. You stayed open late so I could get home safe that night." Michael blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, I remember. The red sedan. You were worried about driving back in the snow." The woman nodded, smiling now. "That's him. He's the only honest mechanic I've met in this city. Don't let anyone here tell you different." For a moment, the laughter stumbled. The smirks faded, replaced with a few uncomfortable glances. Rachel felt something shift inside her chest. She looked at Michael, really looked at him, and saw not just a man out of place, but a man who carried quiet dignity in a room full of masks. Michael lowered his eyes again, embarrassed by the sudden attention, but Rachel tightened her grip on his hand beneath the table. She leaned closer, her voice low enough for only him. "You don't need to pretend for them," she whispered. "You're doing just fine." And for the first time that night, Michael almost believed her. The moment of quiet respect from the older woman didn't last long. The silver-haired man leaned back in his chair, clearly irritated that his little game had been interrupted. He forced a laugh and lifted his wine glass, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Well, isn't that touching?" he said. "Our resident mechanic saves the day. But tell me, Michael, since you're seated at this table, maybe you can enlighten us. What do you think about tonight's auction strategy? You know, raising capital, managing assets, all that fun stuff?" The people around him chuckled, waiting for Michael to trip over his words. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. She hated this game, the way they treated people like props to make themselves feel taller. Michael froze for a moment, staring down at the linen tablecloth. He wasn't a strategist. He didn't speak the language of mergers and assets. But he did know what it meant to fight for every dollar, every bill paid late, every choice between groceries and gas. And maybe that was enough. He lifted his eyes slowly, his voice calm but steady. "You want my opinion? I think raising money is easy if you're sitting here in this room. The hard part is making sure the money actually helps someone besides the people already at the table." The laughter softened into a low murmur. He continued, his words carrying more weight with each sentence. "Look, I don't know much about auctions or portfolios, but I do know what it feels like when a dad brings his kid into my shop and asks me to just patch it up because he can't afford the full repair. I know what it feels like to see a family choose between fixing their brakes and paying the hospital bill that showed up that same week. So if raising capital means more kids get turned away because their parents can't keep up, then I don't see that as progress, I see that as failure." Silence. Not complete silence. There were still the clinks of silverware, the faint hum of a waiter moving through the room. But at this table, every set of eyes was fixed on Michael. Some looked amused, others annoyed, but a few, just a few, looked thoughtful. Rachel watched him with a quiet awe she hadn't expected. There was no performance in his words, no hidden agenda. Just truth, plain, raw truth. And it was cutting through the noise in a way money never could. The silver-haired man forced a laugh, breaking the stillness. "Well, isn't that quaint?" he sneered. "Feelings over facts. Perhaps you should stick to oil changes, my friend, and leave the thinking to those who understand economics." A few chuckles rippled across the table, but they felt weaker this time, less certain. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Michael. She could tell he wanted to shrink back, to let the moment pass. But she also knew the damage had already been done, not to him, but to the arrogance of the room. For the first time all evening, Rachel felt a strange flicker of pride. Pride for a man she barely knew, sitting beside her in a suit that didn't fit, daring to speak words no one else in this ballroom had the courage to say. And though Michael lowered his eyes again, Rachel thought to herself, this night isn't going the way they planned. And maybe that's a good thing. The conversation at the table limped on after Michael's quiet speech, though it felt more forced now. A few people tried to change the subject, but the weight of his words lingered, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Rachel could feel it too, the way truth sometimes sits heavier than laughter ever could. She glanced at Michael. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the untouched glass of water in front of him. He looked like a man who had said too much and wished he could take it back. But to her, he hadn't said nearly enough. "Michael," she asked softly, leaning closer so only he could hear, "you spoke like someone who's lived it. You've lost someone, haven't you?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment she thought he might shut down completely, but then he exhaled, his voice low and steady. "My wife, 3 years ago. She got sick, and the bills, They piled up so fast I couldn't see straight. Insurance kept saying no every time we thought we'd found a way forward. In the end, all I could do was sit beside her bed and watch the woman I loved disappear. Rachel's chest tightened. She had braced herself for a story of hardship, but nothing prepared her for the rawness in his tone. He wasn't telling it for sympathy. He was telling it because it was the truth, and truth was the only thing he had left. She looked down at her wineglass, her throat dry. Her mind raced back years, to her younger brother Daniel. He'd been just a teenager when the diagnosis came. Bright, funny, too young to understand why hospital corridors replaced classrooms and friends. Her family had begged the hospital's board for help, pleaded for a chance at an experimental treatment. They were turned away with rehearsed apologies and legal phrases that all boiled down to one thing: he wasn't profitable enough to save. Daniel had died before his 18th birthday. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she set the glass down. For so long, she had locked that part of her life away, burying it beneath deals and contracts and charity events that never really reached the kids who needed help. And now, sitting beside a man in a rented suit, it all came rushing back. "My brother," she whispered, her voice catching. "He died waiting for the same kind of help your wife needed. They told us it was too expensive, too risky, but what they really meant was it wasn't worth it to them." Michael turned to her, his eyes softening. For the first time all night, he wasn't just embarrassed or defensive or bracing for another insult. He was simply present. Two people, strangers until an hour ago, suddenly bound by scars that no one else at that table could see. Around them, the chatter picked up again, people moving on to lighter topics, but Rachel and Michael sat in their own quiet corner of grief and recognition. "You're not alone," she said quietly. He gave a small, almost broken smile. "Neither are you." And in that moment, the laughter, the mockery, the flashing lights of the ballroom all faded. What remained was something heavier, truer, two lives that had been marked by the same cruel system, colliding not by chance, but by the weight of loss. The quiet moment between Rachel and Michael didn't last. In a room like this, nothing stayed private for long. From nearby tables, whispers drifted across the air, sharp enough to cut. "Did you hear? She brought a mechanic. Must be some kind of statement." "No, it's desperation. Look at him, he doesn't belong." The words weren't aimed at them directly, but they were meant to sting, and they did. Michael sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his shoulders pulled in as if he were trying to make himself smaller. He'd spent years being overlooked, ignored, but tonight felt different. Tonight, every eye seemed to be on him, waiting for him to prove the whispers right. Rachel heard it all too. She had spent her life around people who smiled to her face and mocked her the moment she turned away. But now it wasn't just about her, it was about the man sitting beside her, the man who had trusted her enough to stay. And she felt her blood heat. The tension broke when a woman in a shimmering dress, someone Rachel vaguely remembered from school, leaned across the table with a smile that was all teeth. "Rachel," she said sweetly, "you always did have a flair for the dramatic, but really, this? A garage worker as your date? What's next? Are you going to let him run your portfolio?" The people around her chuckled, relieved someone had said what they were all thinking. Michael's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, as if the words weren't worth the fight. He reached for his water, his hand shaking slightly. Rachel didn't hesitate. She set her glass down firmly, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "You know what's funny?" she said, meeting the woman's eyes without flinching. "Every man in this room is dressed in the same expensive suit, saying the same tired lines about profits and mergers. But the only person here who's spoken with any honesty tonight is him." The chuckles died immediately. The woman blinked, her smirk faltering. "Well, Rachel leaned back, her voice softer now, but every word deliberate. "You see a man in a suit that doesn't fit. I see a man who works hard, who's raised a daughter on his own, who knows what it's like to lose everything and still stand up the next morning. That takes more strength than most people at this table will ever know." The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter had been. A few eyes darted away, embarrassed, while others studied Michael with something new, curiosity, maybe even respect. Michael looked at Rachel, surprised, almost unsure of what to do with the sudden defence. He had been ready to retreat, to let them laugh, to carry the weight alone, but she hadn't let him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the only one in the fight. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." Rachel's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes, I did." And with those simple words, the fragile thread between them pulled tighter, strong enough now to hold against the storm of whispers swirling around the room. The auctioneer's voice carried easily across the ballroom, smooth and practiced like a man who had spent his life charming wealthy donors. He smiled wide as he scanned the crowd, his gaze finally landing on Rachel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, drawing out the words as though he were about to reveal the grand prize of the evening, "why don't we hear a few words from one of our most distinguished guests, Rachel Hayes, and her date." The room erupted in delighted murmurs. Some people clapped, but not kindly. It was the kind of applause meant to usher someone into a trap. Rachel stiffened beside Michael. She knew exactly what this was. They didn't want her opinion. They wanted the spectacle of a mechanic fumbling through a speech in front of people who had never worked a day with their hands. Michael's stomach sank. He shook his head slightly. "Rachel, I can't..." She squeezed his arm, leaning in close. Her voice was calm but steady. "You don't have to perform for them. Just tell the truth." And before he could argue, the crowd's attention was already pulling them toward the stage. Rachel walked first, chin lifted high, refusing to let them see hesitation. Michael followed, every step heavy, as though his boots were filled with lead instead of polished shoes. The lights were brighter up there. He could feel the heat of them on his face, could see the gleam of eyes waiting for him to stumble. The auctioneer handed him the microphone with a grin that said he thought this was going to be fun. "The floor is yours," the man said. Michael gripped the microphone. His hands shook, just slightly. He looked out at the sea of faces, laughing, waiting, ready to eat him alive. He thought of Rachel's words, "Just tell the truth." So he did. "My wife's name was Sarah," he began, his voice rough. "She was 34 years old when she died. She worked hard, paid her bills, trusted the system that promised it would take care of her. When she got sick, we were told her treatment was too expensive, too experimental. We begged, we pleaded, and every time the answer was no, not worth the cost." The ballroom, so loud moments before, began to quiet. Michael took a shaky breath, the words tumbling out now. "Do you know what it's like to sit by a hospital bed and watch the person you love slip away? Not because there wasn't hope, but because someone with money decided her life wasn't profitable. That's what I live with every day. That's what my daughter lives with, growing up without her mum." He paused, swallowing hard. "So when I hear people tonight talk about raising capital, about managing assets, about making the numbers work, I think about Sarah. And I think about the kids this fundraiser is supposed to help. If those kids are nothing more than numbers on a chart, then all of this..." He swept his free hand toward the glittering chandeliers, the polished tables. "All of this means nothing." For a moment, not a sound moved through the ballroom. The only noise was the faint hum of the lights and the soft, uneven rhythm of Michael's breathing. Rachel stepped forward, placing her hand gently on his back, steadying him. Her presence wasn't for show. It was for him. And for the first time that night, Michael realised he wasn't standing alone. The weight of Michael's words still lingered in the air when Rachel stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the stage. She reached for the microphone, not to take it from him, but to share it. The crowd leaned forward, sensing something more was coming. "My brother's name was Daniel," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "He was 17 when he got sick. The doctors said there was a treatment that might help him, but it was considered experimental, too risky, too expensive. My family begged, we prayed, and we were told no." Her eyes swept across the glittering tables. "He died before his 18th birthday. Not because there wasn't a chance, but because the people in charge decided his life wasn't worth the cost." The murmur that followed wasn't mocking this time. It was uneasy. Rachel tightened her grip on the microphone. "So when I hear Michael talk about sitting beside his wife's hospital bed, being told the same words, too expensive, not worth it, I believe him, because I've lived it too." She took a breath, steady, deliberate. "And that's why tonight I'm making a choice. I will no longer give my money to events like this unless they prove that families in crisis actually see the help. Not the hospitals, not the sponsors, not the people chasing headlines, families, real people. If that makes some of you uncomfortable, so be it. If it costs me invitations to sit at tables like this, I'll live. But I will not sit quietly while parents are forced to bury their children because saving them didn't look profitable enough. Gasps rippled through the room. A man coughed awkwardly, another shifted in his chair, eyes darting anywhere but the stage. Rachel pressed on, her tone sharp now, but not theatrical, just certain. This isn't about making a statement. This is about finally telling the truth. And the truth is, what we call generosity tonight isn't generosity at all if it doesn't reach the people who need it most. She lowered the microphone slightly, her hand brushing against Michael's. In that simple gesture, she anchored herself to him, not for appearances, but because he was the one who reminded her what mattered. Michael looked at her, stunned, his chest tightening. She hadn't just defended him. She had shared her own wound, and in doing so, she'd given his story the weight it deserved. And for the first time all evening, the laughter and sneers that had filled the room were gone, replaced by something the crowd hadn't expected to feel: shame. The applause never came. Instead, the ballroom filled with restless whispers. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others leaned toward one another, eager to tear apart what they'd just heard. Rachel's stand had shaken the room, but it had also drawn blood. From the back, a man in a tailored navy suit rose slowly, his smirk already waiting. He was a board member, Rachel remembered, the kind who thrived on intimidation. His voice carried easily. "Touching speech," he said, dripping sarcasm. "But perhaps before we crown Mr. Thompson a saint, we should remember who he really is. Bankruptcy filings, mortgage payments missed, cars repossessed, all public record. This is the man you're holding up as a hero?" The crowd buzzed again, half shocked, half entertained. A few people chuckled under their breath. Michael froze, his throat tight. He had spent years trying to bury those memories, the phone calls from creditors, the foreclosure notices taped to the door, the humiliation of knowing he couldn't keep up no matter how hard he worked. And now, here it all was, laid bare in front of strangers. He lowered his gaze, shame prickling his skin. His instinct was to shrink back, to let them win. But Rachel didn't give them the chance. She stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Yes," she said firmly. "Michael filed for bankruptcy. He fell behind on payments because he was fighting for his wife's life. He drained every dollar he had, worked until his body gave out, and when that still wasn't enough, he kept going. Tell me, how many of you here would have done the same? Or would you have walked away once the bills got inconvenient?" The room went still, a few faces dropped, their smugness faltering. Rachel's voice softened, but the steel in it remained. "You call that failure, I call it proof. Proof that he loved his wife more than money, proof that he refused to quit on her even when the system did. If that embarrasses you, maybe the shame isn't his, maybe it's yours." The man in the navy suit opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He sat down quickly, adjusting his jacket as if that could hide the flush creeping up his neck. Michael stared at Rachel, stunned. His worst moments, the ones he had buried deepest, had just been dragged into the light, and somehow she had turned them into something else. Something not ugly, but noble. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man defined by loss. He felt like someone worth standing beside. The ballroom dissolved behind them like a bad dream as Rachel and Michael stepped into the cool night air. The valet scrambled to bring her car around, but for a moment neither of them spoke. Michael tugged at his tie, his shoulders slumping now that the weight of 100 stairs wasn't pressing down on him. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "You didn't have to go through all that for me." Rachel turned, studying him in the glow of the streetlights. "Don't apologise. You weren't the one who should have been ashamed in there." Her voice softened. "You were the only one who told the truth." He looked at her, unsure of how to answer, and then nodded once. Truth was all he had left, and for the first time it felt like it had actually mattered. The drive to his apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full, like both of them were holding words they weren't ready to release. When they pulled up to the modest brick building, Michael hesitated. "You don't have to come up," he said gently. "It's not much." Rachel smiled faintly. "Michael, I've had more than enough of much for one night. Let me see the place that's real." Inside, the apartment was small but neat. The walls were dotted with crayon drawings, taped up proudly despite their crooked edges. A few photographs rested on shelves. Michael, with a woman who had his daughter's smile, a baby in her arms. The sight made Rachel's chest tighten. From the bedroom came the sound of small footsteps. A little girl with hair falling into her eyes appeared in the doorway, holding a stuffed bear by one arm. She froze when she saw Rachel. "Daddy?" she asked. "Who's that?" Michael bent down, lifting his daughter into his arms. "This is Rachel," he said softly. "She's a friend." The girl studied Rachel with wide, curious eyes. Then she pointed to the paper taped to the fridge, a family drawing in uneven lines, a tall figure, a smaller one, and a third in the middle with no face filled in yet. "I'm making a new picture," she explained seriously. "This time it has 3 people." Rachel felt her throat tighten, unexpected emotion flooding her. She knelt down, her expensive dress pooling on the worn carpet so she could meet the little girl's eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Can I help colour it with you sometime?" The girl's face lit up with the kind of trust only children can give so freely. She nodded, nestling her head against Michael's shoulder. Rachel glanced up at him then, and in that small apartment, surrounded by crayon drawings and second-hand furniture, she felt something she hadn't felt all night in that glittering ballroom. She felt at home. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood in front of a row of cameras again. This time, the chandeliers and crystal glasses were gone. The press conference was held in a modest community centre, its paint chipped in places, the air filled with the faint smell of coffee brewing down the hall. Folding chairs lined the floor, not velvet seats. Parents with tired faces sat beside reporters, and a handful of kids chased each other quietly near the back. It was nothing like the ballroom, and that was the point. Rachel adjusted the microphone, her fingers brushing the edge of her notes. For days she had wrestled with what people might say. That she was using tragedy for attention. That she was trying to reinvent her image. She almost called it off twice, her courage faltering when the whispers of doubt grew too loud. But then she thought of Daniel, of Michael's wife Sarah, of all the families who had written to her since that night, telling their own stories of bills they couldn't pay, treatments they couldn't reach. That was what finally steadied her hands. She glanced at the front row. Michael sat there, his daughter curled on his lap, her small arms wrapped around him. He gave her the kind of nod that said, "You're not alone in this." Rachel cleared her throat. 3 weeks ago, I stood in a ballroom and realised something I should have seen years ago. Money doesn't change lives unless it reaches the people who need it most. That night, I made a promise to myself, to my brother's memory, and to the families who've been left behind, that I would stop giving to systems that bury their help under red tape. She paused, her voice thickening. My brother Daniel never got the chance to see adulthood. Michael's wife Sarah never got the treatment that could have given her more time. And there are too many families with the same story. That's why today I'm starting the Daniel and Lily Foundation, named for both of them. This foundation will focus on families caught in the cracks, the ones told no when what they needed most was hope. The room filled with quiet applause, not the kind she was used to in ballrooms. This was softer, slower, the kind that came from people who understood because they had lived it too. Rachel stepped away from the podium, her eyes drifting back to Michael and Lily. The little girl lifted up a fresh crayon drawing she'd made while sitting on her father's lap. 3 stick figures, hand in hand, under a bright yellow sun. At the top, in big crooked letters, she had written, "Family." Rachel knelt beside her, her expensive heels pressing against the scuffed tile floor. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lily grinned. "It's us!" Michael's eyes glistened, and for a moment the noise of the room disappeared. It wasn't about speeches or cameras anymore. It was about this. A child who believed in family, a man who had carried so much loss, and a woman who had finally found the courage to turn grief into something good. Rachel reached for Michael's hand, not for a headline, not for applause, but because it felt like the truest thing she could do. And as the cameras flashed, she realised that for the first time, she didn't care how the world would spin this story. She cared that one little girl felt safe, that a father felt seen, and that somewhere out there, another family might hear the word yes instead of no. Lesson: true strength isn't measured by wealth or status, but by love, sacrifice, and the courage to stand for what's right. Sometimes the most powerful change begins when ordinary people dare to tell the truth. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and your support. If you found meaning here, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.